Thank you so much, Bank of America and Ishmael and Ari, for sharing your story. We have an exciting lineup of leaders now next taking the stage, a truly remarkable group of folks, including Nadine Smith from Equality Florida, advocate, author, and Pulse nightclub survivor, Brandon Wolf, DEIB practitioner and expert, Lily Zhang, and more. So we will first get started with a very close friend of Out and Equal, someone leading incredibly critical work right here in the Sunshine State. Executive Director of Equality Florida, Nadine Smith.
Did a full 180, crazy, thinking about the way I was. Did the heartbreak change me? Maybe, but look at where I ended up. I'm all good already.
Hello, Floridians. I mean, at least for the next few days, you're all Floridians. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you. You know, a lot of people realize that when we issued a travel advisory, we did it because we were getting calls from all over the country. We were getting calls from event planners, and they were asking, will we be safe? And it was a question we couldn't answer for each individual. So we said, we're going to tell you what the laws are, and you have to make decisions for yourself. And I will tell you, as a parent, it has been devastating to me to know that there are people who no longer live in the state of Florida because they do not believe they can keep their kids safe. So I want to be really clear when I say I have nothing but respect for people who made the decision not to have their conference in Florida. I have nothing but respect for people who made the decision that they needed to leave our state in order to provide health care and safety for their children. Nothing but respect. And I have nothing but respect for the people who read that travel advisory, understood it was not a call for a boycott, it was a request for reinforcements, and here you are. The only position for us that was unacceptable was silence in the face of what is happening. And, you know, I recently was talking with a friend whose father was one of the first businesses to integrate in Miami, in the state of Florida. And I want to just be clear that the story I'm about to tell unfolded in 1967. I was 2 years old. I know, you're doing the math, I look good. I was 2 years old, and her father was young. He had just come back from college to take over the popular family business, and he tried to get others to say, you know what, it's time for Jim Crow to end. It's time for us to stop requiring black people to come in through the back door and sit at different tables. And they were scared. They didn't want to be the first. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. The first day he announced 30 employees quit. He got death threats. But he stayed the course because these were his values. And over the course of weeks, not only did customers come back, but it became the most popular place in the city. And all of those people who told him to be afraid, to not step forward, they looked around and they saw that it was not only the right thing to do, but business-wise, it was the smart thing to do. And right now, in the business world, in the midst of all of this turbulence, it is a gut check moment. It is a moment to say, are these values, or are these marketing materials? And for the businesses that have stepped forward, I want to thank you for walking the talk, standing with us, and understanding that when we say we are, it must mean that we get to be ourselves wherever we are. It is painful to see swastikas and neo-Nazis walking boldly through the streets in my state while trans people and parents of trans and LGBTQ kids have to calculate their safety. And the only way this ends is when we collectively push back together. Now, I get to do something that is really exciting to me. I get to introduce our next speaker. And I want to tell you that I met our next speaker in 2016, not long after the Pulse massacre. He was a survivor. He lost two of his best friends, narrowly escaped with his own life. And he had come to the Democratic National Convention to stand in silent support of the mother of his best friend. But during rehearsal, once they discovered that he was a Pulse survivor, they quickly surrounded him, the media quickly surrounded him, and began peppering him with questions. And as the person who had invited them and organized it, I was feeling overwhelming guilt, like, what have I done? I've thrown him to the wolves. I thought I was gonna have to, dive in and carry him to safety. My fears were so terribly, terribly misplaced. He handled the situation with absolute calm, absolute poise, and a clarity that had me calling back to the office, and I said, we need this guy full-time doing this work. Well, it took a few years for us to lure him away from Starbucks. Sorry, Starbucks, if you're here. Not sorry. And for the past 4 years, he has been a colleague. He has become a fixture in national media. He has played an incredible role in shaping the national conversation and the pushback to this relentless attack, not just on the LGBT community, but the banning of books, the censoring of curriculum, the criminalization of science-based medical treatment. He has been at the epicenter of shaping that message. And last week, he took on a new role as the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign. Please join me in welcoming to the stage author of A Place for Us at a time when we must demand and defend and need more than ever places where we are. Join me in welcoming author, activist, and changemaker, Brandon Wolf.
Thank you. Love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to my forever boss, Nadine, for that beautiful introduction. Hello, out and equal, how are we? I love that. Well, I want to, like Nadine, welcome you to Florida. But I want to dig just a little deeper and not just welcome you to Florida, I want to welcome you to Orlando, which I called home for 15 years until last week when I moved to DC. And I affectionately refer to as the seat of the resistance against right-wing extremism in this state. I'm really here to thank you for being here. Not just for being in Florida, not just for being in Orlando, but thank you for making your presence matter while you're here. Thank you for making your presence here be with purpose, for sending a clear message and affirmation of the kind of state and country we all know we deserve. I'll tell you, as a kid, I never imagined spaces like this were even possible. I grew up in a small town in rural Oregon where, as you can imagine, not many people looked like me, not many people loved like me. In fact, when I graduated high school, there were about 2,000 students in the total student body. We served this big county area, and of those 2,000 students, 11 of us were black. An even smaller number than that were out as LGBTQ. So you can imagine, unlike my peers, I didn't have career ambitions, I didn't have grand dreams, I just wanted to belong. I did everything I could to try to fit in, but I never found that sense of belonging and safety. I didn't find it at school. I didn't find it at home. I went off to college, and I didn't find it there. But sitting in the back room of a Starbucks store, yes, I apologize, Starbucks. Sitting in the back room of a Starbucks store, eating a moldy bagel, wearing an apron, I didn't have enough quarters to wash for weeks at a time. I saw an ad in the school newspaper. It said, "Help wanted, Walt Disney World." And I thought, now, if there's anywhere I can be really gay, it's probably there. It turns out that instinct was right. So I took a leap of faith. I packed 2 suitcases. I moved 3,000 miles away from home to a place I'd never been to before in search of somewhere to belong. You know, when I was a kid, people used to say to me, even the ones who loved me very much, that the world was just never going to be ready for someone like me. He said I was always going to have to find a way to be black enough for some spaces, white enough for other spaces, and masculine enough to be safe in any space. But I found a different kind of belonging here. I had to believe the world was bigger than I'd been told. And it's true. Here in Orlando, I found that sense of safety and belonging. I fell in love with this community. I found safety and belonging in foods I'd never tried before, in languages I'd never heard before. I found it in spaces created just for people like us. And I found safety and belonging for the first time in chosen family. That word didn't mean a lot to me before I got to Orlando. But I learned really quickly what it meant. I met my best friend Drew in 2014, and he changed my life. I remember it like it was yesterday. I met Drew on a blind date, a half-blind date, because I am a millennial gay man, which meant I thoroughly Instagram stalked him beforehand. You know, I'm like browsing his feed, deciding who would take whose last name, picking out names for our children, all the top priorities. And I found a mutual friend liking all of his pictures. And so I took another leap of faith. I said, "Hey, my future husband, Drew, you like all of his pictures. Could you set me up on a date with him?" He said yes. We get to date day. You should also know I'm very inherently an introverted person, so it takes me a lot to work up to the one-on-one thing that you do during dates, a small talk. So you can imagine I'm standing there in my bedroom with the full-length mirror, and I'm giving myself the pep talk. I'm like, okay, he's going to ask you what your favorite food is. The answer is tacos. He's going to ask you what your favorite color is. The answer is green. Put on my lucky pair of underwear, knowing no one would see them but me. Bolt out the door. Hop in the car, and I get to P.F. Chang's at the Millennium Mall, a very classy establishment. And I parked just far enough away so that if I had to run out screaming from embarrassment, he might not see me get into the car. I went to the doors that were a little translucent. I pulled them open, and there he was, sitting on a bench, and he looked exactly like I'd imagined him. I sat down, we ordered a round of drinks, and he was holding this big martini glass, and he said, "I have a question for you." And I thought, well, I have been preparing for this literally all day, so hit me with your best shot. And he said, "I wonder what your thoughts on the for-profit healthcare industry are in America." And I almost blurted out green, because that's what I'd practiced all day. That was not the right answer. We had a conversation about healthcare, and then we talked about the economy, and we talked about politics, and we got to our table, and we talked about arts and entertainment and food and old flings. We talked about all of it. We talked about life, and what was astounding to me is that never once did Drew stiffen his wrist to avoid detection. Never once did he lower his voice to make sure that the booth behind us didn't hear us talking about boys instead of girls. Never once did he deepen the gravel in his voice. He wasn't trying to be enough for anyone, because he knew he was enough exactly as he was. I'd never met anybody like it. Now, I regret to inform you we did not get married or have children, but we did become best friends. We became attached at the hip. In 2015, he met his partner, Juan, and we became the Three Musketeers, traveling the country together, laughing, crying, living boldly. The funny thing about safety and belonging is that when you discover it for the first time, you experience normal. A normal that I didn't realize people like us were ever afforded. a normal that I'd been told I would never have access to if I didn't learn to shave off the edges of who I was. But here it was, normal, right in front of me. In this community, we refer to June 11th of 2016 as the last normal day. Everything about it was normal. It was a Saturday. It was a summer day. I spent time by the pool. I fell asleep in a lounge chair. And when it came time for the day to wind to a close, I did the most normal thing. I texted my best friends and asked if they wanted to get a drink. They got to my place a little before midnight. I was almost never allowed to have control of the cocktail shaker because I make drinks like 3 or 4 times as strong as they need to be. I'm like trying to get to the point. But I think Drew could see that I'd had a rough week, and so he relinquished control of the cocktail shaker and just grimaced at me from across the room every time he took a sip. We listened to the same playlist we always listened to, watched the same music videos we always watched. And when it came time to pick where to go, we just went somewhere that we'd always gone. We went to one of our safest places. We went to Pulse nightclub. Everything about it was normal. Pulse was a place where you could be you. Pulse is one of the first places I ever exhaled as a queer person. It's one of the first places I ever held hands with someone I had a crush on without looking over my shoulder first. Pulse is one of the first places I dared to wear something as vibrant as this without worrying what someone might call me. It was that for so many people, and everything about Pulse was normal that night. Same drag queen that was always there, scowling at me, snatched my $5 at the front door. We went through the same beaded doorway, past the same disco ball, to the same bartender, ordered the same drinks we always ordered, and we even stood in the same spot on the patio we always stood. Drew had a master's degree in clinical psychology, and when he'd had a cocktail or two, he would offer you a free therapy session, whether you wanted it or not. So that night, he had a therapy session for us. He was frustrated that we so often let the little things get in the way of how much we care about each other. He wondered aloud why we don't focus more on what makes us similar as opposed to what makes us different. And when he was coming in for a landing, he would drape a long, gangly arm over your shoulder and pull you in tight. Maybe it was to hold himself up from one too many, I'm not quite sure. But that night he draped an arm over my shoulder and he said, "You know what I wish we did more often? Is tell each other that we love each other." Everything about it was normal until it wasn't. It was just after 2 o'clock in the morning when I was in the bathroom washing my hands. I can remember the poster on the wall above the urinal. I can remember this plastic cup sitting on the edge of the sink. I can remember how cold the water was from the faucet that night. And I will never forget the first sound of gunshots. The hair standing up on the back of my neck. I'll never forget the looks on the faces of people who barreled into the bathroom looking for refuge. I'll never forget the girl behind me shaking, trying so hard not to scream that I could feel her vibrating on the tiles underneath me. I'll never forget locking arms with those people whose faces I wouldn't recognize today and making a sprint for an exit. I'll never forget telling myself to put one foot in front of the other, daring myself to get past the dance floor without looking toward where the gunfire was coming from. I remember wishing I got a chance to say goodbye to my parents because I just knew I'd never talk to them again. And I remember the sense of relief when the door flung open and I was standing in the parking lot. There was chaos, there was confusion, but I was free. I had made it out. And I also remember how fleeting that sense of relief was when I learned what happened inside the club that night. In the early hours of June 12, 2016, a man armed with a weapon of war and filled to the brim with hatred charged in my safe space and opened fire. He fired over 110 rounds into the club that night. He killed 49, mostly LGBTQ people of color, and injured 53 others, our friends, our family members, our neighbors. Drew and Juan, my best friends, my chosen family, my normal, took 19 of those rounds and never made it home to say goodbye to their parents. Pulse changed everything. It changed everything for me, obviously, personally, my career path, everything about how I see the world, but it changed everything for our community. I've often argued that Pulse didn't send shockwaves around the globe simply because of the devastation it caused here in Orlando. Pulse hit people in the gut because we know better than any other community that when you invade a safe space like that, you invade all of them. When you take aim at our community like that, you take aim at all of us. Pulse was meant to scare us. It was meant to make young people question whether or not the world was ever going to have space for them. It was designed to make people go back into the closet, to force us to hide. And we knew there was a real risk that those things would happen. So, standing at a crossroads at an inflection point, this community made a decision. We were going to be better. We were going to do more for each other. We were going to call ourselves Orlando United and Orlando Strong. We were going to put rainbows on everything. We were going to send a clear message that when you come to this city, no matter who you are, no matter who you love, you belong here too. I believe our country is at a very similar crossroads. The LGBTQ community from coast to coast and beyond is under assault, politically, rhetorically, and yes, physically. We've been plunged into this state of crisis, a full-blown state of emergency, by power-hungry politicians and their right-wing influencer friends who are intent on building careers at our expense. We are in a state of crisis, and we find ourselves faced with some of the same questions we've been asking ourselves over these last 7 years. Will we allow it? Will we allow hate to devour us? Will freedom continue to be nothing more than a campaign slogan hijacked by right-wing extremists, or will it mean something? Will it be a value worth protecting for all people? Will diversity, equity, and inclusion continue to be political punching bags, or will we defend them as the core values necessary for our collective success? Will we continue to create safe spaces, welcome people with open arms, or will we pull back? Will we shy away? Will we allow our values to collect dust on a wall somewhere because doing the work right now is just too hard? We're at an inflection point in this country, and it reminds me of the thing that sent me into action. 6 days after the shooting, we had a funeral service for Drew. I was a pallbearer that day. And as I was helping to push the casket down the aisle, I found myself gripping the side so tightly that my knuckles were turning white. It's because I didn't want to let go of my best friend until I'd found the right words to say goodbye. I looked down at the front of the church, and I made him a promise. I promised him that I would never stop fighting for a world that he would be proud of. It matters that you're here in Florida right now in this very moment, because a world that Drew would be proud of is a world all of us can be proud of. A world that Drew can be proud of is a world where every family is treated with the respect they deserve no matter their makeup, where we're celebrated for our differences, not derided. It's a world where every single young person is given what they need in order to thrive, no matter their identity. It is a world where no matter who you are, no matter who you love, you know you are of value. A world that Drew would be proud of is a world that all of us can be proud of. And it's a world we deserve. I said that I'm on this stage to thank you for being in Florida. Thank you for being here in Orlando, because not only is that a world where we can all be proud of it, not only is it a world that we deserve, it is a world worth fighting for. And your presence right now is sending a signal that we will never stop fighting for it. That world is possible when we stand in solidarity in rooms like this one with people just like you. That world is possible if we lock arms with those people, if we say unapologetically that we are indeed stronger together. That world is possible if we live more boldly, if we exist more proudly, if we challenge each other to rise to the moment, not shrink away from it. That world is possible if we choose to do it together. I think back to that promise a lot. The thing that propelled me off the couch and into the fight, the thing that brought me from the sidelines and into the work full time. A world not just that Drew would be proud of, a world that all of us can be proud of, a world where safe spaces like Pulse Nightclub are everywhere, A world where a young Brandon never has to worry that there will never be space for him at all. Each and every one of you fights for that world every single day, and I am so honored to be in that fight with you. Thank you for being Floridians. Thank you for being Orlandans. Thank you for being here this week and for fighting for a world we can all be proud of. Thank you.